Good evening, welcome to my channel. Sorry it's been a while. I've been building a fence with my dad. Thought it would be easy to build a 20-metre wide, 6-foot high fence, which involved digging through concrete to put 10 posts in and then everything else, clearing huge amounts of vegetation. Turned out it was quite a big job. Anyway, ended up taking about 9 days in total. So yes, I've been away from you for a while. I hope you've survived. But the good news is I have another 5-word story based on random words as ever. And I'm going to read that to you now. So the 5 words that generated this story, and I have to say, I had an instant idea from this one. It was kind of phenomenal. Just a real demonstration of how this system can work to inspire ideas. Those 5 words were as follows. And this is story number 145, and it's called Barter. It's amazing how distracting a wobbly stool can be, thought Miles, trying to figure out why his laptop was taking so long to boot up. The rheumy eyes of the village elders gazed patiently at the alien in their midst, the tall Englishman from the Anglo-African Development Agency. Miles was relatively new to his role, and he was keenly aware that his assistant, Nwanda, was far more experienced and spoke the tribal language far more fluently than he could. She was both his translator, his assistant, and now, seemingly, his coach, as he whispered in his ear, "Slow down, they're not in such a hurry." What indeed was making Miles rush this? This was his 7th encounter with tribal representatives in this barren and wild northern part of the country. It wasn't that he didn't like meeting these people. They were always incredibly kind and solicitous, insisting on sharing some of their meagre food and hot, sugary, rather bitter tea with their urban visitors. No, if he was honest, it was more Miles' realization of the disparity in wealth and opportunity between the AADA representatives who arrived in jeeps and sometimes even helicopters, and the custodians of these ancient lands where the rare earth mines would be situated. How on earth could he even hope to bridge this divide and explain how important neodymium and ytterbium were to the electronics industry, when there was probably one smartphone in the entire village? This place was little more than 2 intersecting semicircles of mud and straw huts, goat pens and chicken coops surrounding a muddy, often bone-dry well. Nwanda had told Miles the village had persisted in the basin of this immense valley for over 1,000 years. How? Was Miles' plaintive, unspoken response. Worse than the economic disparity was the paucity of the offer AADA were making on behalf of the mining companies. Full and unfettered access to the site for decades to come, in exchange for some solar panels, better irrigation, a few boxes of seeds and some cattle. $1.5 billion of estimated mineral wealth in exchange for a few £1,000s of gear, plants and livestock that would probably break down, fail to take root or perish in this arid, unforgiving clime. Miles found himself thinking a forbidden thought. Why should anyone choose to live here? Before realizing that choice had precious little to do with it. The laptop finally chimed out its cheery hello, lifting one elder's left eyebrow, but otherwise impressing nobody in the cool, shady hut. Miles took a swig of acrid, lukewarm tea and opened his spreadsheet, scrolling down to the name of this village. Before he was forced to double-check, Nwanda leaned over and whispered its name into his ear. They all sounded too similar to his Western ears, so Nwanda pointed to the appropriate column. As I said, the support packages will start to arrive next week, and we'd hope to break ground by mid-December, before the longest night. Miles felt rather proud of himself for remembering that last phrase. He was in a place where sunsets and moonrises still meant something. The only artificial lights here were a few festoons run on an oil-powered generator, the flickering illumination of cooking fires, and lamps fueled by goat fat. And the stars, of course. He'd forgotten the incredible dusting of stars. The Milky Way here was an amazingly clear spray of shimmering silver dust floating on a pool of inky blackness. The elders conferred, nodded, and the middle one began a lengthy reply. Miles would have to wait for Nwanda's translation. How she could hold all those words in her head in 2 languages at once without writing anything down astounded Miles. He suspected she heavily edited the tribesmen's responses. Miles rocked a little nervously on his wobbly stool, and an elder turned briefly and frowned before returning to his discussions. While he was waiting, Miles cast a casual eye around the meeting hut. Its interior was painted in colourful daubs, some abstract, others figurative. Men, women, children, birds, and goats. It was during his visual sweep that Miles started at the sight of two wide white eyeballs peering back at him from the gloom. A small boy around 5 or 6 years old was sitting in the darkness picking at his dusty bare feet. Was he pulling a splinter from one of them? They're in agreement, pending the first shipment, of course, Nwanda said. Although they would like to increase the cattle requirement to 2 cows and 11 goats per month. Was that it? Was it really going to be this simple? Other tribes had asked for a cut of the mine's profits. Of course, they'd been denied. These 3 men of incalculable age, possibly in their 90s, perhaps merely in their 60s given their challenging lifestyle, seemed easily satisfied. Miles decided not to express even a flicker of surprise. He made notes in the relevant cells of his spreadsheet and closed his laptop. However, he couldn't help satisfying his curiosity. The boy, is he okay? Without waiting for Nwanda's translation, the elder on the left, the one with impressive grey braids draped over his left shoulder, replied in English, Grandson, football. He loves. There followed a lengthy spiel in the tribal language. Seemingly the football field where the village boys played was situated in a level but stony part of the valley. The boy had trodden on a flinty shard. For some reason this made the village elders laugh, as they rose to shake Miles' hand and say their goodbyes, foreheads resting briefly on their guests' shoulders, as per the customs of leave-taking. As they made their way back to their driver and waiting jeep, Miles turned to see the little boy come hopping out of the tent, his left foot now wrapped in something. Nwanda, he asked tentatively, how come the elders have shoes but the kids don't? Nwanda shrugged. Economics. The little ones grow so quickly, it doesn't seem worth buying many pairs as they get older. Boys don't usually get shoes until they're about 15. Sometimes they wear their father's or brother's cast-offs, stuffed with cloth or leaves to make them fit. More often than not, they go barefoot. It's not usually a problem. Unless you love football, Miles interrupted. He just had a probably unwise but necessary idea. Wait a minute. This was the last visit in Miles' current schedule. He'd be returning to the country's capital this evening, then leaving for England the following afternoon. He didn't need the wad of grubby notes bulging in his inside pocket. Unused bribe money he hadn't required. Miles broke into a casual lope and reached the elders before they headed back into their hut. The boy had vanished back into the darkness. Miles pulled out the roll of notes, awkwardly offering it to the elder with the braids. Take, for the boy. Having no idea how much they'd understand, Miles dropped a flat hand to his side, indicating the boy's height, then mimed kicking a ball and pointed into the tent. There was a moment of mutual incomprehension. Then the braided elder smiled, nodded, and bowed. The others offered words of effusive gratitude. Miles clasped the elder's thin, papery hands over the banknotes, probably worth no more than £10, but maybe enough for a pair of shoes. As he was leaving for the second time, Miles turned again and saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The braided elder had stooped and was pushing the roll of notes under the leg of the wobbly stool. He gave it a test rock, pressed down to flatten the roll, tested the stool again, and stood up satisfied, waving and smiling back at Miles. No, I didn't mean... Miles began to shout before Nwanda's urgent whistle cut through his confusion. For a small, slight woman, Nwanda could certainly attract attention with that keening, piercing note. He hurried over to her, and she seemed to read his mind. Miles, they don't use currency. It's a barter culture. Still, you seem to have pleased them somehow. In his mind, Miles appended what Nwanda did not say. You silly, silly man. I thank you. And that is my story. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, feel free to share it. Hit the like button. But most importantly of all, I'm going to put it on the screen in big letters. Subscribe! Subscriptions really help this channel. And they will help it to grow. And I might even get some guest writers. I really would like to get some, and hopefully even some guest readers. So we'll see. But there's been more views than, there used to be recently. So we're getting there very slowly, incrementally. But until next time, thank you and good night.